The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa.
Nau mai, hoki mai ki a The Fold. E mihi nei, ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is me. This is a monopod about the TVNZ upfronts, which I went to yesterday. This is an event that I mean, basically this time of year is really interesting for the TV industry more broadly. There's a lot goes on. You have Sparta's conference, which is, I think, happening next week. You have the TV awards. There are big New Zealand on-air funding decisions that sort of tend to shape what gets made. So, and the upfronts are where the big TV networks in New Zealand get all of their advertisers and media and production companies in a room and announce what they're excited about for next year, with a whole bunch of their biggest stars around and their big execs, and they're telling that story to the media agencies who direct millions of dollars in ad spend, with the hope that they will get excited, draw lines between all of their clients and all of these shows, and make big commitments that allow the businesses to sort of operate sustainably. So in terms of a single bomb of information about both the kind of pop culture entertainment side of the media, but also about like what are the tectonic shifts. I remember, I think the first upfronts I ever went to were TV3s, as it was then known, in 2014, and that was the year they announced The Bachelor, and they had Paul Henry was really prominent and John Campbell was nowhere to be seen. And the following year you had Campbell Live ultimately cancelled, and that big shift towards reality TV was sort of signalled there. And so you can kind of see where a network is heading and which way the wind is blowing through what they emphasise and what they bury at these things. They're also just fun. And, you get a lot of people in a room, a lot of money, a lot of pressure, generally a lot of booze and really good sort of food, and there'll be like photo booths and like lolly stands. They're really quite opulent affairs, at least they used to be. So in the early years, I remember going to one at the Civic where the place was rammed, that like there was a drummer rose up on a riser through the stage. It was more elaborately done than most normal shows you'd go to at the Civic. Easy, big chunky, well north of six-figure budget spent on these things, which you can understand because you're trying to get people to part with a lot of money. And you can sort of feel that in the venues. The Civic, obviously, been to them at the Cloud, the ASB Theatre. Spark Arena was TVNZ's last year. There was 3 had one at the Northern Club once. They're really trying to tell you a story about how everything's going up and to the right, and you want to get in on this is the vibe. It's massive for all the executives involved. Yesterday's was hosted by John Campbell and Melissa Stokes. They had, Scotty Morrison and Scotty Stevenson and some people who weren't called Scotty involved as well. But it's easy for them. They're naturally charismatic. They're used to doing these set pieces. But for the execs, Brett McAnulty, who's the current acting CEO of TVNZ, Nivak Rogers, who actually has done a lot of on-camera stuff, but she's the acting head of content. Jodie O'Donnell, who's the head of commercial with TVNZ. For them, they have to go out and really sell this thing in a sort of a Steve Jobsian way. And that might not be their natural, mode, but you just got to do it because it's the upfronts. So a couple of things which really stand out about this year's editions. The first is that right now I'd love to be talking about what 3's upfronts were like and contrasting them with TVNZ's, because you can typically really feel the difference between the networks and where they're heading, and the sort of the personalities of them come out at times like this. 3 is not having an upfronts this year. Like, upfronts are on some level, they're for the trade. I've written about them, but they're typically not written about. I find them interesting. A lot of people wouldn't, but I've just listed off why. But they really do matter. You're getting clients in a room, you're getting them excited. You've been historically spending a shitload of money on them. To just not do them is a massive signal that things are really tight over there at 3. I had a 3 source signal to me that the optics of holding a splashy event just wouldn't be right. I think the organisation is hurting, and in the aftermath of the decision to cancel the project, you can feel that. So that alone is probably, in terms of the health of New Zealand's media industry more broadly, for a small data point, I think that one is incredibly instructive. So TVNZ is having one, but where was it? It was at TVNZ. And because of that, TVNZ is a pretty amazing venue. I think it might be Warren and Marnie. It was rumoured that it was meant to be a mall, but either way, it got a great refit a few years ago. It's got this big high atrium in the middle, and it's a beautiful space, but it's limited in size. So they had to do 3 upfronts effectively. I think the first roughly targeted media, the second the production community, and the third the big spending media people. And that probably means that's when you get the top shelf out, whereas the media were making do with croissants and mimosas. I'm grateful to them. I had one of each, lovely. But the point is that this is just a really pared back affair. It's deliberately so. You just can't be at a time when you're making people redundant, or no one's getting pay rises. You can't then also be splashing it around, even if that's actually the most logical thing to do to try and get more cash out of advertisers. And that was touched on by Jody, the the head of commercial at TVNZ, who did describe, normally media is just the last thing they will ever mention is how they're really doing. Right now, no one can pretend. She described it as a tough year. Brett McAnulty did the same. John Campbell, who's really good at this stuff. You almost wouldn't necessarily expect him to be, but he is a consummate pro at these type of events. He brought out a can of Sprite that he'd picked up from the vending machine as a sort of a way of, he just did a little bit about it in terms of that's the kind of where TVNZ's at right now. So you do learn a lot about the organisation, where it's headed. This one started with a really sustained and really meaningful haka pōwhiri, which was from Western Springs College. Nivak Rogers and Scotty Morrison's kids were part of it. The thing didn't feel. Sometimes you go and that type of set piece, it feels like people are just waiting around for it to be done, or the organizer is doing it because you have to do it nowadays. It's not like that at TVNZ. TVNZ really has, it has a marae on site. It really does embrace its Māoritanga, its Aotearoatanga is very deeply felt within it. That it'll be interesting. They talked about being a treaty-centric organisation. So we've got a new government coming in which is litigating the treaty. How long will it be able to sustain that position? Typically TVNZ's been very responsive to changes in government. I thought the most stark illustration of that was that with a month after the 2017 election, Mike Hosking was no longer the host of 7 Sharp and John Campbell had been hired. They're very adept at knowing who their owners are and knowing how to read the room, I guess. So hopefully TVNZ can sustain this kind of beautiful journey it's on. Be interesting to see what influence, if any, the new government does have on that.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
So I'm going to pick through a few just sort of quick notes off the back of it. The first is a bit of a critique. TVNZ is, one of the things that unveiled was Te Pairangi, the horizon, which is their sort of strategy to become a digital-first company or organisation. I think in general they're doing pretty well at that. TVNZ Plus is, probably the best digital property in terms of both the quality of what it serves and the commercial justification for it. But they also, they're really all in on just that. There was no mention of Renews. Now, I'm biased here. My good friend and former colleague Simon Day leads Renews. I was just expecting him to be part of it. They had an amazing year at the Voyagers. That is a very small, I think there might be a dozen people there, team that is, a big part of like reaching the sort of 18 to 34 audiences that they acknowledge that they're struggling with. It wasn't mentioned at all. onenews.co.nz, they've made a huge investment into that. The fact that it's a largely text-based investment is interesting to me. That is duplicative of what else is out there in the market, and they're coming from quite a long way back. On some level, it's reflective of the fact that doing video news in this market is really difficult. That is, video is owned by YouTube, by TikTok, by Instagram, and the economics of news production, which you can see with all the drama at CNN over the last year, in a digital environment, no one really knows what to do. That's either government intervention or it's just going to decay. TVNZ's made a beautiful product, but it's not really in their core business, which has always been video. No mention of social, no mention of audio. This was just, it's about putting what you've always done well in a new environment. So I still think that they've got a ways to go in terms of really incorporating and emphasizing the whole of what they're doing into an event like this. So let's just talk briefly about the new content. One thing that stuck out in terms of, again, where the wind is blowing here, the first item on the press release was about property. This has historically been a place that 3 has dominated with the Block franchise. This is the first year without it. They had House Rules. House Rules was apparently great. It also didn't rate like the Block, and it feels like there's an opening there. And TVNZ, as well as being this lovely public-spirited place that wants to tell stories that nourish this country, is also a stone-cold killer of a commercial organisation. It sees a weakness in its rival, and it has gone so heavily into property. We saw Phil Spencer, one of the greatest presenters in the world, to my mind, of Kirsty and Phil fame, of location, and Love It or List It fame. He's coming out here to do a show about New Zealand's best homes. I'm sure it'll be lovely. But they're also doing Love It or List It NZ. They're doing My Dream Green Home. They're just doing a lot of property shows. that is, as Bernard Hickey describes New Zealand as this a housing market with some other bits tacked on. You never saw that more fully than with all of these shows, which are all built around ultimately getting money out of the sort of that giant DIY all the people who make their money out of doing up, building and selling homes, including banks, etc. So they're making a really aggressive play there. But on the flip side, in terms of that public-spirited part, I don't recall documentary as ever being as strongly emphasised at one of these as it was this year. There's a 6-part revival of Documentary New Zealand, which I think is that's been going a little while. But to put that so high in the mix is interesting. They also have a multi-part docuseries about abuse at Dilworth, which will be harrowing, but is also a very important work. And a series called The Hospital, fronted by or following Emma Waipehana, a spin-off contributor, fantastic writer and journalist who is also a junior doctor at Middlemore Hospital. There's just more of that in the air than there has been historically. And one more new show I just want to highlight. James Musterpick was the only kind of non-core TVNZ staffer on stage. He's got a show called, and I think this is the best title of the year, it's called James Musterpick, A New Man for His Mum. He was really funny. He's just, you sense when a talent, and we've known James through the spin-off since he was a teenager, when they're really kind of flying, and James is that right now. So looking forward to that show. They showed a clip from it. It looked very, very funny. Features an interview with Art Green where James is they're both in the bath together, and he makes his mum get into the shower. I'm not explaining that very well. It looked really, really funny. There's a lot of returning shows. There wasn't as much international as there typically is. Obviously, in the aftermath of the strikes, they're still figuring out how that's going to sit. There's a long section of commercial stuff there. Sometimes when you're watching this, you're very aware that you're not the audience. The audience is the advertising industry. They had this big thing about Black Sand, which is TVNZ's very good sort of integrations and production division. But 90% of media wouldn't even know that exists. One slightly odd note was that one of the people endorsing Black Sand's work was the EECA, which is the people behind the Gen Less campaign that became quite controversial earlier this year for, basically the thesis was that they didn't adequately declare the fact that some of these spots on 7 Sharp and Breakfast and so on were sponsored. So that's exactly the kind of government marketing stuff that National and ACT have signalled that they are going to slash to the bone. That's also really, when it comes down to it, why or a big part of why this event was so humble compared to last year. Last year we had women walking around in dresses made entirely of champagne flutes. This year there was a very limited number of mimosas. That's the kind of contrast we're talking about. But the government has been a very big participant in advertising markets over the last few years. The COVID campaign was over $100 million. And there's just been a lot of very big, high-profile campaigns that have spent quite a lot of money on television, on TVNZ demand, and that kind of thing. And you can just, if you watch an ad break or watch the kind of ads that come up on TVNZ Plus, you'll see that if you really think about who the advertiser is and what they're trying to do, it's much more frequently than has historically been the case, been the government trying to get you to do something. And that's going away, and you can feel that chill, along with obviously a very subdued economic environment more broadly. You can feel that chill in the air. at an event like this. And, you know, a little bit like I say, at least they're having one. 3, you know, says it's considering how to do these events in a digital first era, which is, you know, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure it's also that these events cost a lot of money, and everyone's a bit worried about that right now. And that's just where we're at as local media. Every time audience moves into a digital space, it moves from being a place where TVNZ can confidently claim like probably, you know, like a third of it across all mediums, to one where that's much more likely to be claimed and sold through TikTok, YouTube, and the Meta services. And that's fine. There's lots of great stuff happens on there, but fundamentally none of them create content themselves. So all of the world that does make content in a professional context, you know, with people who turn up and make it for their job, they're threatened by that. And I don't think there's anyone who who works at any of these organizations at any senior level who wouldn't, in their quiet moments, concede that they're not confident about where this is going. You know, media used to grow, our local media used to grow with GDP. It used to be a very frothy, fun, dynamic, profitable sector. There is no part of it that is signaling that now. There are good things happening. NZME shares jumped 8% yesterday after it talked through its digital strategy, which I honestly think is a very good one. And, there will be media on the other side of this, but I think there's going to be blood in the water over the next year or two. And, that will be something that we have to process as a country. There's a real move of audience to those platforms, but also I sometimes think it even outpaces where the audience has gone. There's the thesis that no one watches TV or that all young people are on TikTok. I mean, that might even be true, but they become so powerful that they can sometimes actually outpace reality. And when they do that, they invariably make the products worse. You know, like there are just, you're starting to see and really feel the cuts in these bigger media businesses, and as a result, you know, you're just the product gets worse, and when the product gets worse, it's easier just to go somewhere else. And whether that's like an international version of the thing, like a Netflix or a Guardian, or just a whole new paradigm in terms of the user-generated content platforms. It affects our local media. Maybe that's fine. Maybe that's just natural selection. I don't think it is, and I don't think we're thinking hard enough about what the flow and impacts are. But if you're listening to this podcast and if you have made it through this far, then that won't be news to you. So that's my wrap on the showcase season, as truncated as it was this year. Hope you've enjoyed listening to it. My huge thanks again to O Media who sponsors this podcast. I'm really, really grateful to them for allowing me the time to attend these kind of events and analyse them for you. Ka kite.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to O Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.